Pedro Alonso Lopez. Known as the Monster of the Andes, Pedro Alonso Lopez remains one of history's most prolific but least publicly discussed serial killers. Born in Colombia in 1948, Lopez endured severe abuse and neglect in childhood before beginning a transient life of crime across South America. Between the 1970s and early 1980s, he confessed to murdering more than 300 young girls across Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. Lopez targeted impoverished and rural communities, luring victims with promises of gifts or food. He strangled his victims and buried them in shallow graves in remote areas. His crimes went largely unnoticed due to political instability and poor record-keeping across national borders. He was finally apprehended in 1980 in Ecuador when a failed abduction attempt led to his capture. Authorities discovered mass graves containing the remains of dozens of missing girls. Lopez was convicted of 110 murders, but claimed responsibility for hundreds more. Released from an Ecuadorian psychiatric hospital in 1998, his whereabouts remain unknown. Despite his scale, his name rarely appears in popular discourse, a silent reminder of how geography and poverty can obscure even the darkest crimes. Anatoly Onoprienko. In the 1990s, Ukraine was still reeling from the collapse of the Soviet Union when a string of brutal murders began spreading fear across rural villages. The perpetrator, Anatoly Onoprienko, later nicknamed the Terminator, killed at least 52 people between 1989 and 1996. Onoprienko's methods were as systematic as they were horrifying. He often broke into homes at night, shooting or bludgeoning entire families to death, including children, before burning the properties to destroy evidence. Investigators initially suspected organized crime, unable to comprehend the scale of the killings committed by a single man. When arrested in 1996, Onoprienko confessed to the murders without remorse, claiming he was guided by a divine force to cleanse the world. He was sentenced to death, later commuted to life imprisonment after Ukraine abolished capital punishment. He died in prison in 2013. Despite being one of Europe's most lethal serial killers, his crimes remain largely unknown outside Eastern Europe. Ahmad Suradji. In Indonesia during the late 20th century, Ahmad Suradji, a self-proclaimed shaman, believed he could gain supernatural powers by ritualistically murdering women. Between 1986 and 1997, he killed 42 victims, mostly women seeking his spiritual services for love or fortune. Suradji's ritual involved strangling his victims with a cable, then burying them waist-deep in a sugarcane field, facing his house, a gesture he claimed would direct their spiritual energy toward him. The discovery of decomposing bodies near his home led to his arrest. During interrogation, Suradji stated that his father's ghost had commanded him to kill 70 women in order to become a mystic of great power. He was convicted in 1998 and executed by firing squad in 2008. His crimes revealed the disturbing intersection of superstition, deception, and predation in isolated rural societies. Alexander Pichushkin. Nicknamed the chessboard killer, Alexander Pichushkin terrorized Moscow in the early 2000s. His goal, he claimed, was to kill one person for each square on a chessboard, 64 in total. Between 1992 and 2006, he murdered at least 49 people, mostly elderly men he lured to Moscow's Bitsa Park with offers of friendship or vodka. Pichushkin killed his victims using blunt objects, often inserting bottles into their skulls after death. He documented each murder in a notebook, marking a square for every victim. He was arrested in 2006 after a missing woman's body was discovered with a note linking her to him. During trial, Pichushkin showed no remorse, declaring that life without killing is like life without food. He was sentenced to life imprisonment in a special regime penal colony. Though overshadowed by the notoriety of earlier Russian killers like Andrei Chikatilo, Pichushkin's methodical, self-declared quest for numerical completion stands among the most chilling examples of calculated serial murder in modern history. Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Brazil's Pedro Rodrigues Filho, known as Pedrinho Matador or Little Killer Pedro, occupies a strange place in the history of criminal violence, both a murderer and a vigilante. Born in 1954, he began killing in his teens, claiming his first victim at age 14 after murdering a local official who had fired his father. Rodrigues went on to kill criminals, gang members, and corrupt individuals, often claiming moral justification. His spree included the murder of his own father, who had killed Rodrigues' mother while in prison. By the time of his arrest in 1973, Rodrigues had killed at least 71 people, 47 of them, while incarcerated. Although his actions were driven by personal vengeance rather than sadism, the scale and brutality of his violence earned him infamy. Released from prison in 2007 after decades of confinement, he later became a YouTube personality advocating against crime, a paradoxical transformation for a man once regarded as Brazil's most dangerous killer. Charles Sobhraj. Operating throughout the 1970s across Southeast Asia, Charles Sobhraj, dubbed the Serpent, lured Western backpackers into his confidence before drugging, robbing, and murdering them. Fluent in multiple languages and skilled in deception, Sobhraj preyed upon travelers seeking adventure along the so-called hippie trail through Thailand, Nepal, and India. He and his accomplices used forged passports and disguises to elude authorities. Sobhraj's victims were often poisoned or strangled, their bodies burned or left unrecognizable. He cultivated an air of sophistication and charm, manipulating his companions into complicity. Arrested in India in 1976, Sobhraj escaped prison several times and later served time in Nepal, where he was convicted of additional murders. He was released in 2022 due to ill health. Despite his crimes spanning continents, Sobhraj remained obscure outside criminal history until his story was dramatized decades later. Proof of how charisma and cunning can conceal monstrous intent. Myuki Ishikawa. In post-war Japan, social breakdown and poverty created desperate conditions for many families. Myuki Ishikawa, a midwife in Tokyo, exploited this despair in one of Japan's most shocking and little-known cases. Between 1944 and 1948, she killed or allowed the deaths of over 100 infants born to impoverished parents. Ishikawa argued that her actions were merciful, claiming that the babies would otherwise starve. She received payments from parents unable to care for their children, then neglected or deliberately killed the newborns. The bodies were discovered accidentally when police investigated a local mortuary. She was arrested in 1948 and sentenced to only 8 years in prison, a punishment that sparked public outrage but reflected the post-war government's uncertain legal framework. Ishikawa's case forced Japan to reform child welfare and abortion laws. Her crimes remain one of the darkest examples of bureaucratic apathy enabling mass infanticide.